Knock, knock, open up the door, it's real. With the non-stop pop out and stainless steel.
Hello, warlords and warriors. My name is TBsGuy, and Riot, following their approximately 3-day cadence that they've held on to so far, have once again blessed us with an animated short for me to, well, in this case, make a bunch of shitposts about, but also, like, animation analysis, the thing that I'm supposedly doing here on this channel. So, After Victory is the short about Noxus, which is in conjunction with the promotion that Riot is doing right now for Legends of Runeterra, where they're showing off the Noxus region itself. And so here we are presented with Darius, well, very much in his element, doing what he does best, and the thing that he does, which in his mind makes him one of the good guys, breaking down a corrupt and unjust power structure and replacing it with the meritocracy of Noxus, which is oh boy, that's a subject for an entirely different video to dissect all of that, but for the purposes of the video here, the important thing to note about this particular short is that it is showing Noxus, like, at its best, essentially, in the same way that the Demacian short was showing Demacia at its best, where they go, oh, these cheerful young kids who are learning to be heroes, and with the Shadow Isle short, where we're showing, like, Shadow Isle not at its best, but, like, at its worst, but at its most Shadow Isles-y, at the height of its fantasy. In the same way, this short is showing Noxus at the height of its fantasy as conquering liberators of the oppressed from the unjust power structures of, in this instance, hereditary monarchy. Because that king right there, he's a bit of a basically. And that's kind of all the setup we really need, but what the piece actually is a character piece between 3 specific characters. The king, the slave girl, and Darius himself are the 3 actors in our play, and the slave girl here is torn between loyalties, or rather torn between ways of life. She can continue being a slave to this, you know, royal, or she can choose to stand for Noxus, which is what Darius invites her to do. That little speech he's about to deliver.
Kings demand you kneel before their heirlooms and unearned titles. Noxus wants you to stand, so you can be reforged in a glory shared by all.
One thing you might notice is that Darius's voice actor has changed. This is not the same voice actor that provides the voice for Darius in the actual card game. The speculation I've seen online is that Darius now shares the voice actor with Yorick, and there may be many reasons for that. Maybe they're actually changing Darius's voice actor, which I don't think they are, because he still voices the character in Legends of Runeterra itself. More likely, the voice actor for Darius was not available for whatever reason, and they chose someone else to replace him. But there may also be a different reason. Darius has a very different voice in this short, because Darius is a very different character in this short than he usually is, in the sense that when we see Darius usually, especially in the game, it's Darius on the battlefield, merciless warrior charging down his enemies, like, we fight for Noxus, blah, like that shit. In this short, he's playing a different version of himself. Like I said, he's playing the gentle liberator of slaves from the oppression of false monarchs, and so his voice is soft and genuinely quite gentle. In fact, he's like, hey, king, you've lost. Like, you played the game well, but this time it's really over, and so I would like to offer you the chance to surrender your crown and join the Noxian Empire. Like, his voice performance is also meant to make him sound substantially more reasonable compared to the king, who's a lot more like, well,
the kingdom is mine, or it is a graveyard. Show them, girl. Die for your king. Go!
So, we opened this short the same way that we've opened the other ones in the series so far, on a static establishing shot of our location, telling us where we are in the world and giving us a little bit of time to get situated before we drop right into the action. And it's using many of the same techniques that were used in previous shorts, but somewhat more obviously. They're using a parallax effect with the various layers of the image composition in order to give you a sense of depth and scale. That is something I talked about way back in the Freljord short, like 6 days ago, where this image right here, all of this stuff is two-dimensional illustrations. These aren't modeled in 3D or anything, but these illustrations have been broken up into layers and then layered on top of each other so that they can be moved relative to each other, and they've had, like, obviously flame animation and stuff layered over on top of it that allows for this effect here. Notice the cliff in the foreground here, how it's moving faster than the stuff in the background. In it, as it moves away, it's revealing stuff behind the cliff. Basically, they're just moving the various parts of the image relative to each other, giving us this sense of depth and scale, but without having to model, you know, this entire scene in 3D in order to get that that spatial feeling. And I'm imagining they probably use some of the same animation tech for the flames in the background here that they used in the Freljord short. Now, if you pay attention to, for example, the warriors and soldiers here, you can see that nobody's moving. Like, it's a battle scene, it's combat, but the soldiers aren't moving. They've got little torches that are moving around, but the soldiers aren't really doing anything. The banners are fluttering in the wind too, which I think is a lovely detail. One thing that is happening, though, is that they're tearing down this right here, this crown thing of a stag or a goat or whatever it is. It's a symbol of the king's power, and the king's power is being torn down. So in the very first shot of the thing, we are being told, even though it might be a little hard to notice, but we are being told in no uncertain terms what it is that's happening here. A king's power is about to be broken. And that falling stag head leads naturally, you can see it's falling past the window here, leads naturally into the next shot when we see that thing happening from the inside, ba-boom. And the king and his men in his hall trying to defend themselves. Now, the interesting thing about the narrative here is that from a storytelling perspective, when we see this, at first, we are probably inclined to be on the king's side, I think. And I think this is intentional. Like, you see these guys, they're under attack, they're being besieged, their city is on fire. These soldiers are trying to defend their king who sits on the throne, and he looks, in terms of his character design, fairly like you can see they're overmatched. They're the underdogs. They're like a bunch of soldiers trying to hold back whatever massive thing is trying to smash through this gate. And the king's character design especially kind of sells this idea, oh, this is like an old gray-bearded king, like a wise leader of his people. In fantasy stories, we're kind of used to thinking of, oh, well, kings can be good, right? Like, maybe he's a good guy. So initially, because we are seeing things from their perspective, because we're experiencing their fear and their tension, because we're seeing their world under assault, you would be inclined to be sympathetic to the king. And as Captain Farron gently knocks on the door to ask them to let him through, somebody, and Darius wanders in. Look at the way Darius is framed in the shot. Like, his face is in shadow, his shape is outlined by light and fire, and he carries this giant axe. And Captain Farron himself, in terms of character design, looks like, I mean, he looks like an evil monster from the Lord of the Rings movies. Like, Noxus has always had this visual design that's like mostly reminiscent of Sauron from the Lord of the Rings universe. Very angular designs, lots of black and red, which are traditionally villain-associated colors, whereas the soldiers for the king here are armed more in like browns and grays and more earth tones, which are colors that are more traditionally associated with fantasy good guys. And then we see the actual point of view character here, the slave girl. It's not the king. She's the actual point of view character, which we are told here when we see her observing the guardsmen being knocked to the ground. And Darius wanders in, a conquering enemy, as the king asks his men to try and defend him from what's happening. And just to kind of drive the point home that we're supposed to see Noxus as the bad guys, Captain Farron steps on a guy's head and threatens to crush it, something which clearly horrifies the poor girl here. So right now we're inclined to see Noxus as the villains, as the enemies, which is setting us up for the reveal later on that it's actually the king who's a massive and Darius has come as a conquering liberator. And this is also where we get Darius' first voice performance, and rather than bellowing like a movie villain as he walks in, he's like, well, you've lost. Like, he's being very gentle, calm, and reasonable, which might be our first indication that, okay, well, he's not behaving like a typical movie villain. So the story is beginning to slowly gather up the threads of, hey, maybe there's more going on here than you would immediately think. Now, once again, we have a mix, I think, of 2D and 3D animation, where the smoke and the debris, I believe, is all... Well, not the debris, but the smoke is 2D animated, and then the debris, I think, is probably... Yeah, that's 3D animated, I can tell from the way it falls. is 3D animated, but the smoke and the debris, and the same thing goes for, let's see if we can find, yeah, the flames in the lantern are 2D animated. And again, we are you can tell because here you can see her fingers are twitching because I'm switching back and forth between 2 frames, but the flame isn't moving. The flame moves on every other frame. It's animated on 2s, as we've talked about extensively already. The same thing goes for the... Let's see if we can find a shot. The same thing goes for the flame and the smoke coming out of the braziers on either side of the king. And the same thing goes for, well, just the various other fire and smoke effects that you see. I think maybe... No, even this smoke is actually 2D animated as far as I can tell. It's animated on 2s anyways. That's kind of surprising to me because I would have thought in a background shot like this they would just CG generate it. Let's talk about timing. Oh, let's talk about timing. There's actually some good timing to talk about here. Because we get 3 knocks. 1, 2, 3, right? The first knock we get is this one. Like, and I'm talking about visual knocks. We hear the knocks more than that, but we get 3 visual knocks. We get bunk, this little one, where we can kind of see, like, it shoves the guys back, but it's not, like, critical or crucial. Then we get the second one where it's like, oh, now we're in trouble. And again, 2D animated smoke coming out of the middle of the door there. Oh, now we're in trouble. Then we get the third knock, at which point Captain Farron is done asking politely. And there's a couple of things happening. Like, first of all, you can see how, as the door opens, we get the rumble and the screen shake, and so the camera tilts off balance. A little bit. Just a little bit. Like, we never really regain the balance. The horizon is going to be slightly skewed for the entirety of the shot, because basically the camera is getting knocked off balance to give you the feeling of being knocked off balance as Captain Farron knocks everything and everyone off balance. And then there's the timing that I was talking about. We get the 1, 2, and the 3, and then on the third, it's like, woof. In the space of like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 frames, boom, the door is completely open. And that's 5 frames at 30 frames per second, so that's like a fraction of a moment, right? Boom, the door opens immediately. Compare that to the knock here, where it's 1, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. That's when the knock is finished, right? So you have this timing of like the little knock, oof, which is very brief. Like the little knock is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 12. Something like maybe 10 or 11 frames. Then we have this one, which is much longer. Boom, boom. Like with this much longer period of reverberation from the punch. And then we have the final one, which is like pow! No time at all, just kapow. He's done asking. And those, like, and that seems like kind of dry to sit around counting frames like that, but those timings are what gives this thing the dramatic tension of that, like those 3 knocks, like that boof, boof, fa-poom. Like that's where that comes from, is because the timings are managed to give you that sensation. And that's like a small, tiny thing, but it's just something I really like in 3D animation. Even though, like I said, we're initially inclined to think of the king as probably the good guy because he's the one who's under attack, and from our perspective it's unprovoked because we don't know what the king did to deserve it. If anything, probably nothing, because Noxus just conquers people they don't really need a reason to. But take a look at his body language. Take a look at the way that he's positioning himself against his soldiers here. It's not like a king sort of sitting up with stolid dignity or fatherly concern. He's leaning forward. He's almost sort of predatorial, which is aided by those large shoulder pads, giving him the look of kind of a greedy, like a predatorial bird or something along those lines. And he's grasping onto the sides of his throne here. Like he's really holding on to it because that's what he's concerned with. He's concerned with preserving his throne, preserving his power. And that carries through in the body language that he uses with his subject, which is like, "In my name, defend me," or something along those lines that he says. And you can see that he really, like, he leans into it even a little bit more as he, like, sends them charging forward. He holds on a little bit tighter to the armrest. And he does that little, rah, 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 in my name, rah, 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 like that fist of command there. But he doesn't make any move to get up himself, like he's sending other people to die for him. So in the character animation, there is that hint of, oh, hey, wait, no, actually, maybe this king is an asshole, come to think of it. And we're told, by the way, that the soldiers aren't really bad guys. Even though the king is we're told that the soldiers aren't bad guys. Because first of all, we get to see the human fear in this guy's face as Captain Farron's boot comes down on his head, but we also see the others, when he's threatened, they don't keep charging forward. Like, they care for him enough to stop and be like, well, that's Dennis, man. We can't let Dennis get killed. So it's like they're not ruthless, they're not heartless, they're not cruel. And again, here's something important. We get to see the human fear in this guy's face. Which is an important thing. It's important that they're not faceless. Think of stormtroopers in Star Wars, or the NPC soldiers in any Fire Emblem game. You never get to see their eyes, pretty much ever. You never get to really see their faces, and that's so that you can dehumanize them. Which sounds a little bit brutal, but that's how it works in terms of character design. Is if you take a look at Rebel soldiers versus stormtroopers in the original Star Wars series, Rebel soldiers, you can always see their faces. Stormtroopers, you never can. And that's because you have to be okay with stormtroopers getting gunned down by the dozen, but you have to feel that it is tragic when Rebel soldiers die. And this takes advantage of a very primal thing in human psychology, which is that when we can see people's eyes, like eyes are the window to the soul, and when we can see people's eyes, we are infinitely more likely to sympathize with them. Because look at the eye movements of this poor man. And the way that, like, as the boot comes down, he crunches up his eyes like, oh god, this is it, I'm gonna die. You feel sympathy for him instantly. Whether you mean to or not, it's like, ooh, boy, oh. Like, even if you're not, like, crying for his poor soul because he's a fictional character, you're still like, ooh, oh boy. You can tell that the man is scared, and it's hard not to empathize with that. And that's what the eyes do. If they had full face visors where you couldn't see their faces at all, you can still get people to empathize with that, but you have to do it with, well, different means. For example, like the trembling fingers that he's trying to hold back Captain Farron's boot with. Which I think is a lovely detail. Like the way that his fingers are like trembling, like, oh god, oh god, oh god. And speaking of eyes, look at the king's response to his soldier's head being crushed. Nothing. Like, just his eyebrows just lower a little bit. He's a little bit, well, those are my soldiers. Grumble, grumble, grumble. Not, oh god, let the poor man go, but grumble, 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 you're stepping on my property. So the character animation is doing a great job of characterizing what sort of king the guy is. Similarly, the soldiers here are like, well, this is a pretty freaking lost cause. So you see this lovely moment of like they just kind of look at each other and go, maybe that's not worth it. And put down their weapons because, like, he's got their friend's head under a boot. Darius, like, there is that slight softness in Darius's expression. Not a lot, but there's that slight softness combined with his voice performance that kind of tells you maybe that guy didn't come here to kill people necessarily. He's just willing to do it if it needs to be done. And you can see that being delivered as the soldiers put down their weapons. You can see how Darius is like, his brow unclenches. Unlike the king, whose response to his soldier being crushed was to clench his brow more and narrow his eyes, with Darius is like, well, they're putting down their weapons. He gives Captain Farron a little nod, and the man goes free. Right? And again, this is Noxus propaganda. I want to stress that. Noxus is still like a conquering imperialist force, but this is how they would present themselves if given the opportunity. Which is why Darius's body language is so subdued. Darius doesn't posture. He doesn't, like, hold his weapon out threateningly. The only time he does that is when he needs to do it at the start with the soldiers. Like, let's not have any more bloodshed. And once they agree to have no more bloodshed, then Darius's body language is passive, calm, relaxed, non-aggressive. Even here, as he's looking over the cauldron where they want to melt the king's crown, his body language is calm and impassive. Even Captain Farron is remarkably unaggressive as he marches on the poor king here, who, like, I'll have a moment of sympathy for him here, and stomps towards him. Gentle. A gentle giant. And that's portrayed in his body language as well. Not so much when he's marching forward, because we don't get to see him. We just get to see the king's reaction and hear his voice performance, which is like, I shall not surrender my crown to, you can kind of hear him being like, have less and less bravado as Captain Farron gets closer, which is very much true in Legends of Runeterra as well. I've played against some Noxus decks, god damn. And you can also see the uncertainty, like you can see him transition from haughty defiance to and this is also the first moment that he finally lets go of his throne. You can see that clawed grip he's had on the throne the whole time. It's like, maybe we can talk about this. But take a look at Captain Farron's body language. He doesn't really care about the king at all. He's not interested in the man. He's like, well, I'm supposed to find a certain thing, so... Oh, there it is. Whoop! Takes it ever so gently off the king's head. He's not ripping it off his head. He's not grabbing his shoulders or anything. He's just, there's the crown. I'll have that, please. Thank you. And having taken the crown, like, he looms over him, but it's not aggressive. Like, this is not an aggressive posture. It's just, well, I have what I came for. And again, like, notice just how placid Darius's body language is. The axe stays down, the shoulders stay down, the face stays relaxed. He does, like, at most, like, a little looking back and forth with his eyes, which, again, the eye gestures in these animations tend to be so good. Like, I have had my problems with some stiff animation in terms of facial animation and things like that, but the stuff that the animators do with the eyes is always good, because notice how his eyes are even half-lidded here. He almost looks a little bored. And then he looks right, looks down, glances over to the left, but he remains completely placid. And now let's talk about the slave girl, her body language, because her body language is also important. The entire time we get to see her up until a certain point, this is her body language. You can see she's slightly hunched over, head is a little bit down, shoulders are up, she's a little bit nervous, she's uncertain, which is like natural. There's soldiers charging into the place where she works. But that's her entire body language. The same thing with her eyebrows. It's that uncertainty and fear is characterizing her body language all the time. You can see here, like, when she notices Darius and turns around, you can see how she kind of raises her hand defensively. Like, oh, like she's like getting ready with a fight and flight response. And you can see it here too, like as she sees Farron walking back, she's like, oh god. Like, you can see there's constant fear, and she's trying to think of what she's supposed to do, which is when she finds her courage being a warm poker inside the brassiere next to her. And here we go. That's kind of funny. You can see even here, as she's hitting poor Captain Farron in the back of the leg. God, that must hurt. That thing must be, like, hundreds of degrees. Even here, you can see, like, her expression is not, it's not confidence. It's fear and determination. And this is the first time that Darius's body language changes, ever since he put down the axe. But you can see even here, like, he's not really worried about it, because, like, oh, well, last show of bravery. But here, when Farron is about to, well, I'm gonna get that, that's when Darius, all of a sudden, his body language gets assertive. Smacks him in the chest with an axe. No. Shoulders are up, eyebrows are down, chest forward. That's when the body language is assertive, because he's commanding his men to stop. And see the girl's body language again as she approaches the throne, like I talked about. Hunched over, kind of loping forward, trying to be smaller than she really is, trying to be less than she really is, trying not to be assertive, trying not to threaten. Subservient, submissive, pleading, begging. And this is when the king, like, he really shows off what a piece of garbage he is, where it's like, a slave girl, unfit to touch my crown, the gods deliver my crown. He begins on, like, he basically does a supervillain monologue. And you can see, speaking of gentility, Captain Farron took the crown gently from the king's head. The king does not take the crown gently from the girl from the slave girl's hand, he just snatches it violently, so violently, in fact, that her immediate reaction is to flinch back from him as though she's expecting him to strike her. And that's how the body language of the slave girl tells you what kind of life she's lived and what kind of relationship she has to this man. Her expectation of him is violence and punishment, and her body language shows it. And you can really see it, like, in the shot after, like this one here, when she doesn't even dare to look at him, she looks away, and you can see her mind racing, and she's ashamed, she's afraid, she's angry. She's trying to cope with what's happening to her. And Darius sees this. Because you'll notice a little bit. Look how Darius inclines his head. He's not looking at the king right now. There's this little motion of, like, his whole face. You can see it here. That. Like, you can see how he kind of clenches his jaw just a little bit. You can see that happening both out here along the ears, where you can see that the cheek expands a little bit, and you can see his mouth sort of clenching. And then look how his head moves. There, he changes his gaze a little bit from the king, up here, to something else. He's not looking at the king now, he's looking at something very close to the king. And again, the king resumes that same kind of body language that he had. You can see, he's regained the crown, he's regained his confidence. The gods wish for me to have the crown! Look at his shoulders. Boom. There. That, again, that same predatory, hawk-like, predatory bird, with the shoulders up and the head forward and that, like that kind of posture returns, which is the same posture that we saw him have here. There, so you can see, like, when with his confidence restored to him, he reverts right back to that kind of behavior. And then the king tells the slave girl to go and die for him, which is his final mistake, frankly. And there's Darius. Like, again, compare body languages: domineering, controlling, overwhelming, looming above her. Like, in fact, leaning forward above her, taking up space in her world. Looking back at Darius, why, they're practically at eye level with each other. He's looking her in the eye, while the king is literally talking over her. And again, and you can see Captain Farron is doing the same thing. He's looking her in the eye. While this guy barely bothers to look at her at all. Like, his gaze, like, for a second, his eyes flick down to look at her. Like, why isn't she doing what I'm commanding her to do? There. And then he looks back at Darius because he doesn't give a shit about her. He doesn't care about her. And now she makes her decision. No. And take a look at that body language. Like, whoom, shoulders down, chest forward, head held high, chin forward. No. And you can still see the fear in her eyes a little bit. Like, she's kind of scared, but she's determined. And she embodies all the values that Noxus professes to care about. And you can also see in the frame where before, let's see, where's the shot I'm looking for? Here it is. The king is looming over her, and her eye level is, like, way down here, and he's all the way up there looking above her and over her. In this shot right here, all of a sudden, she's as tall as he is. In the frame. I mean, not in reality, but in the frame, she's as tall as he is, and he's trying to regain his power. He's trying to regain his authority over her. But he can't because she's taking up the entire frame. And so he, well, tries for violence. Which, there's only one way to respond to violence in Noxus, which is more violence. Oof. And I do love this, I do like this, I like the reaction shot. Like, I like the, oof, like that, because she doesn't flinch. She doesn't, like, well, she flinches, but she doesn't flinch the same way that she did when the king snatched the crown out of her hand. Like when the king snatched her crown, she was like, oh, she was like falling back and trying to protect herself, basically. Here, it's just like, oof, and then, whoa, what happened? Not fear of being attacked, a fear of being punished. She keeps her gaze steady, her posture straight. She flinches, but not in the same way. And I do love this the shot that comes after right here, like where we see the axe through. I would suggest that maybe there should be some blood on the axe, but Tales of Runeterra has have already shown us that they don't want to do obvious blood because of censorship issues. But I do love the revelation there of Darius, like in this post-throwing pose, telling you the whole story of who it was that threw. There's other ways to do that. Like the shot you could do instead is to have the axe flying towards the king, and then cut to Darius with his arm outstretched, and then cut back to the king that dies. Like, that's another way to do it, but it's a little bit less efficient. This does the job much, much better, I think. And I like this shot especially, because look at this. The crown falls to the floor, and so does she, but notice where the crown is relative to Darius and the girl. They are at eye level. Like, they are at level with each other in the frame as equals, and the crown below them is an object that they're deciding what to do with. The power of the crown, symbolically speaking, is broken. And Big Daddy Darius, again, notice the cinematography establishing an equality between them. We have a shot reverse shot here, which is like very basic film language. But we have Darius talking directly to her, not over her, to her, and her looking back at him. And again, in the frame, like, you get the sense that there is a real connection between them, that Darius has a respect for her, just like the film language is telling you that. But so is Darius's body language, of course. Because again, he's resumed that passive, placid, gentle, affirming behavior. Rather than anything aggressive. He's not like, yeah, crush the kings and throw down their power. Rah. None of that. He's just like, hey, I'm just letting you know a better way of life is possible, and we would like to offer you a place in the Noxian Order. As he, puts out a hand and offers to give her a place. And the power of the crown is finally smelted and broken. And here's a delightfully unsubtle but wonderful shot with the power of the crown melted into the melting pot of Noxus, because Noxus is a melting pot. That's the whole thing, is like, they have Minotaurs, they have Vestaya, they have Yordles, they have like humans, barbarians, various tribes. Everyone is welcome in Noxus so long as they pledge allegiance to Noxian ideals, blah blah. Which is the whole idea of Noxus, is that it's just grand, diverse melting pot from all over the world, disparate nations coming together to form one great, disparate peoples coming together to form one great nation. The crown is melted into that melting pot, and from that melting pot is forged her sword. Her sword forged from the king's crown. The king that she overthrew, as she joins Captain Farron and Darius as an equal in the army of Noxus. By the way, this lady, probably the Trifarian Glory Seeker. She's joined the Trifarian Legion under the leadership of Darius, and yeah, she's probably the Trifarian Glory Seeker, going by the character design anyway. And that's like, that little thing is just the most, the cleverest bit about this, like just using the crown to forge her sword, which is such a nice symbolic little of her taking up the power that was once denied to her by someone who didn't deserve it, which again is the Noxian ideal. Look at the king here. I love that thing. Like, he's turning his head away from Captain Farron and kind of sinking into his own shoulders, like, I don't. And you can see that it's that little gesture with the eyes, that one right there, of like looking up, like like a guilty dog that has just been caught eating food it wasn't supposed to. There's a lot of good character animation in this. Like, the character animation in this short, I think, is a lot less stiff than it felt like in the Shadow Isles short. And I don't know, like, it could be that this one was produced earlier, where they had more time and more budget. Like, there's a lot of reasons why production quality across a series of things can vary from thing to thing, because sometimes, like, you start out the project with a certain timeline and a certain amount of budget, and you have a certain amount of workers available to you. for that period, and you're like, we can spend a bunch of extra time on a bunch of extra details, and then you get to the end of the project, and it's like, oh, we've run a little bit over on a few things, and there's a global pandemic, and the budget is getting a little bit low, and maybe you cut some corners there. That's normal in an animation production. You can see that happening in pretty much every single seasonal anime you've ever watched. Notice that the early episodes oftentimes tend to have higher quality animation because those are the ones that are supposed to draw in the audience, whereas the later ones, sometimes it gets a little bit saggy in the middle and near the end of an anime's run, and that's because of those same factors, like you prioritize the budget where it'll go. And it may be that they had planned originally to release the Noxus one first, and it was supposed to be a little bit nicer looking. It can be all kinds of factors, is what I'm trying to say. I don't know anything about the internals of the production, but the Noxian one here, I think, probably has the highest quality animation so far, followed by the Demacian one, and then the Freljord and Shadow Isles ones where the character animation just got a little bit stiff for me. That may be some of the reasons why, and it might not be. I'm just speculating. Anyway, I think that's kind of it. I think I'm kind of done. Yeah, I really liked this one. Like, I'll have to do a Politics of Noxus video someday, actually exploring what kind of politics Noxus has, because they are not quite as benevolent and egalitarian as this short would like you to believe, but that's a subject probably for another day. If you've enjoyed this video, feel free to hit the like, comment, and or subscribe buttons in whatever order it pleases you, because that is helpful. It makes numbers go up on YouTube, and numbers going up is the thing that the YouTube algorithm wants. Like, it's the thing that it wants from us, and if the numbers don't go up, then channels die. So if you want to help me out or any other YouTuber that you follow, hitting the like, comment, and or subscribe buttons in any order is a very helpful way to do that. If you want to help me out more directly than that, then I have a Patreon, I have a tip jar, and I have a merchandise store. And if you want to avail yourself of any of those, then I'd be very grateful for the help, and if not, that's completely okay as well. At the end of my videos, though, I do try to encourage people to, generally speaking, support content creators directly with anything they can, whenever they can. Especially in times like these, with like a global pandemic on and all kinds of stuff going on, advertisers are pulling a lot of their advertisement from online platforms like YouTube, which means that ad rates for certain YouTubers are plummeting. It hasn't been very bad for me, thank God, probably because I'm in the gaming space, but people who are doing stuff that is more affected by things like global pandemics are seeing ad rates drop as much as 50%, and they could really use the help to stay afloat these days. So if there is an online content creator whose work you enjoy, whether it's me or someone else, then I highly encourage you to support them directly with anything you can, whenever you can, because it matters so much more than you think. Even a $1 donation can be the same as thousands of views on a video. Anyway, if you're not in a position to be able to do that, please don't feel any guilt about it. That's completely normal. Times are tough all over right now. Last thing I have to advertise, I have a second channel where currently my Final Fantasy VII Remake playthrough is being uploaded in 1-hour episodes, which might make it a little bit easier for people to watch than the 9 and 6 and 10 hour VODs that are on this channel currently. I also do some streaming over there. We're going to be doing Ori and the Blind Forest this weekend, so if you're interested in that game, I highly recommend that you come and have a look at it. We've also got playthroughs of Final Fantasy VIII and Majora's Mask going on that channel right now, so if you want to head over there and subscribe and also like and comment and do all the YouTube numbers stuff, I would be very grateful. Outside of that, thank you very much for watching, and please remember to wash your hands.